Good morning, econ students. So today we will be talking of unit 5.2, the resource market, more specifically about the changes in the resource market for demand and supply. So according to our AP Microeconomics unit guide, our learning objective here is to you need to be able to explain the firms and the factors' responses to changes in incentives and the constraints. The changes in the determinants of labor demand, such as the output price and the productivity of the worker, cause the labor demand curve to shift. The changes in the determinants of labor supply, such as immigration, education, working conditions, age distribution, availability of alternative options, preferences for leisure, and cultural expectations, and of course, the cause the labor supply curve to shift. So this is our unit 5.2. After you finish watching this video, you go to my AP College Board. There is a short attendance task with 4 questions to do just to practice. Okay, please take notes. Okay, this is really important. I have something telling me that unit 5 will be one of the questions in your test. I don't know why. Okay, so let's go. So first reminder, remember that our marginal revenue product of a resource is equal to the demand as we saw in our unit 5.1. Okay, so just as a reminder, yes, marginal revenue product is equal to our demand of labor. Okay, remember this is where the graphs we had for the supply and demand in the industry here on the left and in the pharma on the right. Okay, remember on the firm, the supply is inelastic, that's why it's horizontal, and in the industry is the simple demand and supply curve. Okay, and if they're in a perfectly competitive labor market, they have the same wage equilibrium. Okay, remember that. Okay, so just as a reminder here, so how we worked from our last class activity here, when we have the MRP, so our marginal revenue product shows how many workers in a firm is willing and able to hire different wages. Okay, so here for a wage of $20, my marginal revenue product, which is my demand, for 1 unit of labor, I will get a marginal revenue product of 70. For 2 units of labor, 100. For 3, 70 again. And for 4, 30. For 5, 20. For 6, 10. And then if I get 7, I start getting negative marginal revenue product. Okay, and then if you don't remember last class, we saw that our MRP equals MRC would be equal to 5, where the cost would be the same as my marginal product. Marginal cost would be the same as marginal product. Okay, remember that our marginal resource product here is actually the result of a multiplication of these two columns here. Okay, the marginal product, which is the number of additional products created by each additional unit of labor multiplied by the product price. Okay, this is really important for our class today. Okay, so what affects MRP? So what affects MRP? Either the product price, either the unit of labor, and the product that is produced by each unit of labors. Okay, so plotting these points here, we can understand that the demand will be the same as the marginal revenue product. Now my question is why, and I'm sure you remember that. Last class we saw that this is because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. So when our firm or our industry reaches our peak of the ATC, it reaches the zero of our marginal revenue, which means MRC is equal MRP, and this is where we need to stop hiring more workers. We're gonna start losing money instead of getting more money from each additional worker we get. Okay. Um, also, what is also important to understand from this downward sloping is that each additional resource that I get here, and remember, I'm talking about resource, but this graph also applies to land and to capital. Okay, remember, land and capital. Okay, not only labor, land and capital. So each additional resource here actually generates a negative impact of um, additional product. Okay, that's why it's a downward sloping as well. Now my question is, what happens if the demand for the product that I'm producing increases? So if the demand for my product increases, the demand for the product increases, because I am the resource market, the demand for the resource also increases, causing the MRP to increase and the demand shifted to the right. Now let's think a little bit. My demand for the product increases. If my demand for the product increases, mm, mm, it means that the price of this product decreased, right? Mm-hmm. We're gonna see later how this impact, okay? Um, So let's talk about the three shifters of resource demand, okay? The shifts are actually the same as we have seen before, just applied to resources, okay? So number one, changes in the demand for the product. Again, we're talking about the resource demand, not the product demand. So my product, the price increases in the product market. This would increase the MRP and also the demand for the resource that produces these um, this product. Okay, the changes in productivity. So there's a new technology that advances. This would make an increase in the marginal product and therefore would increase the marginal revenue product and also the demand. How can we see this in the graph? Okay, how can we see this here in the graph? Let me show you here. If the price, remember the price was 10 here. If my price increases to 100, look at my additional revenue per worker now. My marginal product is the same, but my additional revenue per worker is different. Look here, each worker is worth more, right? If the worker works more, what is happening here? This is the derived demand. If a product is worth more, the worker is worth more, right? Okay, this is really interesting to see. So if I change my product price, the worker is worth more. So where my point here would be 100, where this would be, you see this all this shifted to the right? Okay, great. Now the last one is changing the price of other resources. So the substitute to resources. What happens to the demand for assembly line workers if the price of a robot falls? Think a little bit. If the price of a robot falls, which is another resource, a substitute resource, the demand for the assembly line workers will decrease, right? Because the demand for the robots will increase since the price falls. Okay? Now, if they're complementary resources, what happens to the demand of nails if the price of lumber is increased significantly? Remember, complementary goods, if price goes up, the price of the demand for the complementary resource also goes up. Yes, they are not the opposite, okay? So we're seeing this. Now I have a question here. So this was our data from last class. The units of labor, the total product, the marginal product, the product product was 10. Each revenue per worker, which was our marginal revenue product, and this was our marginal revenue cost. Okay. How would this change if the demand for the good increased significantly? Well, if the demand for the good increased significantly, the price of the good would increase. Remember, the demand increased, guys, not the quantity demanded. The demand increase. If the demand increases, the demand shifts to the right, the price will increase. Okay? Price would increase. If the price of the good increases, the value of each worker would increase. So again here, I was at 10, I go to 100. So my new MRP, how do I come back now? Here, my MRP, marginal revenue product here. My new marginal revenue product is this. So which means that my workers now are worth more. Each additional worker is worth more. And that's why my demand will shift to the right. This is the derivative we were talking about last class. Now, how would this change, again, coming back to the first scenario, how would this change if the productivity of each worker increased? What happens when the productivity of each worker increases? What column is affected here? Column total product, right? Because if my worker can produce more, the productivity, right? The total product is more, which means my marginal product will be affected. And because this and this will be affected, by multiplying by the product price, the additional revenue will also be affected, which will also affect the value of each worker. So it's here. If one unit of labor here could produce 7, and now because the productivity increased, they can produce 70, my marginal changes and my additional revenue per worker also changes to 700. So it was 70, now it's 700. Here, for 2 units of labor, they could produce 17. Now they can produce 170, which means an additional of 100. But even though the price is the same, my MRP here would be 1,000. So all of these means that each worker is worth more, which means more demand for the resource, for my labor. So I want you to stop this video and I want to identify and complete the sentences on your own. And then later you're gonna see the answers. So pause the video, read the questions, answer with increase, decrease. Okay. And then after, we're gonna discuss this later. Set pause. Great. So these are the answers. Increasing demand for microprocessors leads to an increase in the demand for processor assemblers. Again, The increase in the demand for a good will increase the demand for the resource. So here, an increase in the price for plastic piping causes the demand for copper piping. So what is plastic piping and copper piping? They are substitute goods. So substitute goods. Mhm. So if I have an increase in the price for the plastic piping, it causes the demand for the copper piping to increase because the price of the copper will decrease, yes? Since the demand would increase. Okay? So an increase in the price for a substitute good, a substitute resource, my bad, sorry guys. A substitute resource would make its substitute resource to increase the demand. Now, an increasing demand for small homes compared to big homes leads to an increase or a decrease of the demand for lumber. Remember, lumber is a material that produces homes. We are in the United States. We're not in Brazil. Remember, AP micro and AP macro is a test based on the US. We have to think as an American, okay, as a North American, okay? So an increase in demand for small homes would lead to a decrease in the demand for lumber. Because small homes, of course, they need less lumber to produce. Okay? For shipping companies, in the blah blah blah, in price of trains leads to decreasing demand for trucks. So let's see if my demand uh, for trucks decreased, it means I had an increase or a decrease in the price? A decrease, very good. A decrease in the price of trains. Because if I because trains and trucks are complementary substitutes. Substitutes, very good. In terms of shipping companies, they're substitutes, yes? Trains and trucks. So if I decrease the price of trains, the demand for trains would increase, making the demand for trucks to decrease, okay? Decreasing price of sugar leads to a in the demand for aluminum for soda producers. Now what is this? That is really, really intense, guys. Sugar and soda. Sugar is a resource for soda. Aluminum is also a resource for soda, so they are complementary goods. Okay, so if there is a decrease in the price for sugar, the price of sugar, it means there was an increase of demand of sugar. If there was an increase in demand for sugar, there will be consequently an increase in the demand for aluminum, also for soda. Okay, substantial increase in education and training leads to a increase in demand for skilled labor. Very good. Awesome. Let's talk about supply. So supply also has three shifters. Okay, number one, we all know that the qualified workers. So how can we change the supply for qualified workers? Education, training, and ability required. Okay. Um, in terms of how many we have in the market, uh, the number of schools that we have that are able to qualify workers for that. Okay. Also important government regulations and licensing because remember, let's suppose that let's say that now the government decided that waiters have to obtain a license to serve food, and this license for them to get this license it takes 8 years. What would happen to the supply of waiters? The supply of waiters now it's amazing, right? Everybody can be a waiter, right? Everybody can apply to be a waiter. There is no prerequisite. There is no requirements unless being polite, being patient with customers, especially if they're Brazilians. Um, right? Now, let's say the government says, "Oh, you have to study for 80 years to be a waiter." Amazing, right? What happened to the supply? The supply will decrease, right? People, I'm not gonna wait study for 80 years to be a, I want to be that. Huh? It's not worth it. Okay. What about immigration? What about immigration? Immigration is a good question now, especially after some laws that Trump put in the United States for immigrations. For immigration, what do you think if a new law for immigration for I don't know South American, saying that all South American people that are living in the U.S. now have legal rights to work? We would have a supply shift, right? Of labor. The supply would increase a lot because we would have more people able to work legally. Yes. Also, personal values regarding leisure time and societal roles. Yes. Why did the US labor supply increase during the Second World War? Yeah, because people wanted to work, people wanted to serve their nation, right? Okay, that is really important. Now, why do some occupations get paid more than others? You might be thinking that it's all a matter of supply and demand. So let's say I wanted to stop, pause the video again, and use a supply and demand analysis to explain why surgeons earn an average salary of $137,050 and gardeners earn an annual average salary of $13,560. Stop the video, draw two different supply and demand curves for these markets, supply and demand curves for these labor markets, and explain that would explain this difference in the average salaries. Pause. Great. So now if you did your graph, you would have the supply and demand for surgeons and the supply and demand for gardeners. Okay. Again, quantity of workers in your x-axis, wage rate in your y-axis. The demand is downward sloping. The demand of labor, the supply of labor would be way on top here for the surgeons. Now, why is it on top? Because the wage is too high and the quantity of workers is too low. The unit of workers, the quantity of workers in this market is too low. Now, on the other hand, the quantity of workers here, the supply here would be a lot too high. The quantity supplied is too high, and the demand is demand. I'm sorry, this is not supposed to be a D. This was supposed to be a G for gardeners, and this was supposed to be an S for surgeons. Um, so this is how we explain the difference in the average salary. It's a matter of demand and supply. Okay. Now, what are other reasons for differences in wage? And then we're going to discuss this later in another class, in a live class. Labor market imperfections, insufficient and misleading job information. So this would prevent workers from seeking better employment if they have some insufficient job information. They don't know what it means. They don't know what to do or what this job actually does. Geographical mobility. So some people are reluctant to change, to move, or they are too poor to move or to accept a lower wage. And this happens a lot in Brazil. Yes, that doesn't happen that much in the US. We know a lot of people that change cities in the US because they get a new job. In Brazil, that's not that often. You don't see many people changing a lot of cities because they got a new job. Okay. Unions are also important in terms of differences of wage. because they are collectively bargaining, and threats to strike often leads to higher than equilibrium wages. We see a lot of this in Brazil, especially for now that teachers are getting more salaries. We're talking about doctors and health related workers. The unions are talking a lot about how they deserve a better salary, especially now of coronavirus. And then, of course, a lot about wage discrimination that I'm going to be posting some videos about these differences in wage. I would like you to watch in your free time. Some people get paid differently for doing the same job based on race or gender. It is really interesting for you to see the real facts outside the world. And guys, get out of your bubble. Get out of Porto Alegre. Get out of your bubble. It exists. It exists a lot. Okay? And it's very illegal. And it's so subtle that you don't even notice that could be near you. Okay? So see you later. Remember to go on your AP, my AP College Board to do your exercises for your attendance task. Okay, if you go to your AP College Board, it will be here. It is called Attendance Task April 14. It is only 4 questions, if I'm not mistaken. You can see the answers later for FRQ as well. Okay. You don't need to upload anything. You have to do it here. I want to see this done here on my AP College Board.